One medieval shipyard could take a pile of raw timber and launch a fully armed warship in under 6 hours. Not a rowboat, not a barge, a 300-ton war galley, rigged, armed, and ready to sail into battle. This happened in Venice, 400 years before Henry Ford ever sketched his first assembly line. And it forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. What if everything we think we know about medieval technology is wrong? We like our history tidy. Medieval Europe, in the popular imagination, is a candlelit smear of mud, plague, and superstition, sandwiched between the glories of Rome and the genius of the Renaissance. Peasants scratched at the dirt, monks copied manuscripts by hand. Progress, we're told, simply stopped for 1,000 years. But tucked into the eastern edge of Venice, behind walls 2 miles long, sat a facility so advanced in its organization that modern industrial engineers still study it today. It was called the Arsenale di Venezia, and it quietly rewrote the rules of manufacturing centuries before the word factory even existed. Let's demolish the first myth, that medieval technology was primitive and stagnant. The arsenal began modestly in the year 1104, a state-run shipyard tasked with building and repairing vessels for the Venetian Republic. But Venice was not an ordinary city. It was a maritime empire whose survival depended entirely on ships, for trade, for war, for the galleys that carried spices from the east and soldiers to distant colonies. A slow shipyard meant a dead empire. So over the following centuries, the Venetian state did something radical. It stopped thinking of shipbuilding as a craft performed by individual master carpenters and started thinking of it as a system. By the 1300s, the arsenal had expanded into a walled complex covering roughly 60 acres, employing thousands of workers known as arsenalati. By the height of its power in the 16th century, that workforce swelled to as many as 16,000 men and women, all moving within a single, tightly choreographed production process. This was not a village of blacksmiths, each building a ship from scratch. This was something the world had not truly seen before: standardized, sequential, large-scale manufacturing. Here's how it worked, and here's where the second myth collapses. The myth that mass production was born in the smokestacks of the Industrial Revolution, invented by men like Eli Whitney or Henry Ford. Inside the arsenal, hulls were built using a technique that reversed the traditional order of construction. Normally, shipwrights built the internal skeleton of ribs first, then attached the outer planking piece by piece, a slow and highly skilled process unique to each vessel. The arsenal, instead, began prefabricating standardized hull frames. Workers built the shell first, planking over molds shaped to fixed specifications, then inserted ribs afterward. This meant hulls could be produced in advance, in quantity, using interchangeable dimensions, rather than custom-built one at a time. But the true innovation was the canal. Running through the heart of the arsenal was a long internal waterway, and ships under construction moved along it like a vessel moving down a line, pausing at station after station. At one dock, the bare hull was floated out. At the next, it received its mast. Further along, workers fitted rigging. Further still, gunners loaded cannon, and quartermasters stocked oars, rope, and provisions from vast storerooms where every item was numbered, catalogued, and shelved for instant retrieval. A galley did not sit in one place while an army of craftsmen swarmed it. Instead, the ship moved, and specialized teams performed one repeated task after another as it passed. This is, in essence, the assembly line. The same logic Henry Ford would apply to the Model T in 1913, except playing out on the water 4 centuries earlier. The interchangeable parts alone would have stunned later industrialists. Oars, sails, and rigging were manufactured to standard sizes and stored ready-made, so that a ship in need of repair or a new hull awaiting outfitting could be equipped almost instantly from stock without custom fitting. This principle, interchangeable, standardized components assembled rapidly from inventory, is often credited to American manufacturers experimenting with firearms in the early 1800s. Venice was doing it with warships in the 1400s. The proof came in the form of a spectacle. In 1574, the King of France, Henry III, visited Venice as a guest of the Republic. The Venetians, eager to impress a powerful ally, arranged a demonstration inside the arsenal. As the king dined at a banquet overlooking the yard, workers assembled a fully armed galley before his eyes, from raw components to a floating warship within the span of a single meal. Contemporary accounts described the king watching in astonishment as hull, mast, rigging, and armament came together in a matter of hours. It was theater. Yes, the arsenal had surely prepared components in advance, but it was theater built on genuine industrial capacity. At its peak production, the arsenal is estimated to have been capable of producing nearly 1 ship per day, sustained not for a single showpiece afternoon, but as an ongoing wartime output. Now to the third myth, perhaps the most persistent, that medieval labor was universally unskilled, brutish, and disposable, serfs and slaves toiling without rights or recognition. The Arsenalati were nothing of the sort. They were salaried state employees, among the most privileged laborers in Europe. They received regular wages, and in later centuries, some form of pension and support for widows and orphans of workers killed on the job. Arsenalati held such trusted status that they served as the personal bodyguard of the Doge of Venice during ceremonial occasions and stood guard over the ballots during elections of the Republic's leadership. Women, too, worked within the arsenal's walls, particularly in the sail lofts, weaving and stitching the vast canvas sheets that powered the fleet. This was not a workforce of anonymous drudges. It was a skilled, organized, and in many ways protected labor force, centuries before the concept of labor rights entered European law. The genius of the arsenal did not go unnoticed by contemporaries. Dante Alighieri, writing his Inferno in the early 1300s, used the image of the arsenal's boiling pitch vats, where shipwrights waterproofed hulls, as a metaphor for one of the circles of hell, describing the thick, tarry substance bubbling and churning as workers dipped and repaired damaged ships. That a poet could assume his readers would instantly recognize the reference tells us something important. The arsenal was not an obscure curiosity. It was famous. It was, for its time, one of the most awe-inspiring feats of organized human industry on the planet. Why, then, did this achievement vanish so thoroughly from popular memory, buried under the assumption that mass production began with steam engines and English mills? Partly because Venice's power waned. As Ottoman expansion closed off trade routes and new naval technologies emerged, the Republic's fortunes declined through the 1600s and 1700s, and with them, the arsenal's relevance. Napoleon's forces occupied Venice in 1797, and the arsenal, stripped of its purpose, faded into a relic, its innovations unrecorded in the industrial histories written later by British and American authors eager to credit their own nations with the birth of modern manufacturing. But the truth, sitting quietly in the archives and the stone docks of Venice, tells a different story. Centuries before steam power, before factories, before Ford's moving assembly line rolled its first chassis through Highland Park, Michigan, Venetian shipwrights had already discovered the essential principle of industrial production. Break a complex task into standardized, repeatable steps, move the product through those steps in sequence, and let specialization multiply the output of human hands. It did not require electricity or engines or even the printing press. It required organization, foresight, and a state desperate enough for naval supremacy to reinvent the very nature of labor. The next time someone tells you the medieval world was a technological wasteland, remind them of a shipyard behind Venice's walls, its canal thick with half-built galleys gliding past teams of workers, each adding a piece, each moving the ship one station closer to the open sea. The assembly line was not born in an American factory in the 20th century. It was born on the water, in the Arsenal of Venice, 600 years before. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more untold history every single day. See you in the next one.